season, this was a unique one. Trying to battle through whatever it's thrown at you and try to get better. And at this point, you're reflecting a little bit, and also wishing you could play. But as I reflect, as I mentioned, I'm proud of our group and the way we competed and the work that they put in. Secondly, it's been a really good year, continuing to work with Kyle and Landry and develop continuity with them, and look forward to doing that throughout the offseason. And really also want to recognize Tony and his support and really his commitment to building, a championship caliber program and all the things that means, doing it, the right way, as they say, and just the amount of resources that he's been willing to commit to continue to build out, a very robust organization.
When looking at this season as a whole, is there anything that shocked you about this team?
Any season, there's all kinds of little shocks, throughout the year. I've kind of grown to understand that whatever you think you can anticipate, there's always something else. And that's part of, the process of an NBA season, is all those things, trying to continue to, react to them, respond to them, process them, and allow them to have the opportunity to make you better.
What do you think is going to be something that you and Landry, Kyle, and everybody, what are the main points of emphasis that you see right now that you guys will probably talk about, not just reflecting, but looking ahead to what you want to do with this team as you get into the offseason?
Yeah, well, right now for me, the opportunity to just step back for a second, get away, myself, our staff, I think that's really important. And when we come back, I'll look for, I'll whatever opportunity, whatever input that those guys want from me, I'm happy to provide.
When I talked to you at the beginning of last season, you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that it's maybe fair is not necessarily the right word that you use, but it's unwise to maybe judge the partnership of Trey and DeJounte in year 2 as it would have been to judge it in year 1.
Mm-hmm.
But when you looked at, maybe they didn't have enough time together to work on things, but when you look at that partnership, what did you see, and maybe how can that grow moving forward?
Well, first, they're both excellent players, and I think anytime you're, looking at a group and analyzing the group, it's important to not focus on, any 1-2 people. That it is a team and it's collective, and that's the way that I look at it. And really love having the opportunity to coach both those guys.
If you look at the defense from, say, October to April, how did it change or adapt or grow, and sort of what are the next steps towards improving the defense?
Yeah, I think, any kind of big picture, well, offense or defense, as we split the game into special teams as well, there's so many factors that go into it, whether it be adaptation of what you're doing from a tactical standpoint to try to fit your personnel, evolution of your personnel. So it's a complicated answer, and one that we'll continue to look at and think about. And obviously you always want to get better, and that's an area. There's a number of them. I'd be neglectful if I didn't point to other things too. But that's your goal in the off season, is to look at things critically and dig in and look for ways to improve. And it's actually, I think, as I mentioned before, for us to get away, I think is really healthy. And when you do come back, there'll be some of that. Also just the amount of time that we want to put into our players and the work that we want them to do this summer and the work that they're prepared to do, I think, addresses a lot of that as well.
Coach, we oftentimes ask the players, what have they learned about themselves over the season? Just wondering, as a head coach, have you learned anything, or has the season kind of reinforced anything you already knew?
Absolutely nothing, and way too many things to share with you. I didn't learn how to bake a cake. Other than that, you learn to prepare a lot of different meals and deal with a lot of different things, and that's the wonderful thing about this job, and also the most challenging thing about it is you're constantly learning. You really are. And I don't care how many years you've been in the business, or whether it's your first or your 10th, or any organization. Year one is always a unique year, and invariably year two is as well. And at least for myself personally, I'm committed to continuing to get better myself, and those are the things we ask of our team.
Coach, talking through players amongst this cycle, some kind of focus on the fact that injuries really impacted this team, and then other players have kind of said that every team goes through injuries, and so you can't really use that as an excuse. How do you kind of frame the injuries that this team faced this season, and how it impacted the type of year you wanted?
Yeah, I think both those things are true, and they can both be true. That every season does have challenges with injuries. Sometimes the timing of the injuries, not all injuries are created equal. How long guys are out, who's injured at the same time. I know there's all kinds of metrics that try to measure that, and I think we're one of the teams that clearly was impacted. The other part of that, though, is, again, in building on the idea that it's part of it, you really want to use any adversity, in this case injuries, to try to figure out a way to get better, whether that's a given player coming back. And the best example, right, is you break your right arm and then you have to learn to shoot left-handed. Just as simplistic as that. And I think that's true of the team. You're able to find different things out in those moments, and you never wish that. Hopefully we'll have less injuries next year, but that's part of the growth process of a group too, is kind of accepting that those things are going to happen, and choosing to respond to it the right way.
I found it interesting. Clint kind of said at times he felt like maybe the winning mentality of the group maybe wasn't there. Bogey talked about he felt like maybe some guys weren't making the sacrifices needed, and maybe even competing against each other.
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice any of that, and how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I haven't talked to those two guys about that. I think, any team, our goal is always, to be as connected as possible, to compete collectively as much as possible, and I think those are things you just continue to strive for.
Do you believe if this year's roster was fully healthy that you guys would be playing later in the playoffs?
Well, as I mentioned before, I wish we were playing today, and you always want to play later in the playoffs. So hopefully that's something that you can ask me again next year, and we'll have a slightly different answer. Who knows where it goes? But I do think that that's having those goals and those aspirations is great. I mentioned that. I think that's one of the things in working with Tony and Landry and Kyle. Tony's talked a lot about being a championship caliber team and organization, and as I said, the resources that have been committed to that, the work that's being done, the collaboration that's occurring, and that includes our coaches and our players, and then we all want to be connected in the sense that you alluded to.
Follow up on what Lauren was asking about DeJounte and Trey. Their on-off numbers, when they're on the floor together versus when they're on separately, which suggests that they weren't when the team suffered when both of them were on the floor together.
Mm-hmm. I'm
curious to you, obviously numbers can say what you want, but in your opinion, kind of how much is that of the truth of their ability to play together?
Sure. I guess I could just reiterate, I really, coaching Trey and coaching DeJounte, as a coach, anytime you have an opportunity to coach a unique player, a player that is on that level, that you really appreciate. And I appreciate coaching them both independently. And as I mentioned before, whether it's perception, analytics, whatever the measure is that anyone wants to use, myself included, to gauge a team and lineups and those things, I think it's, we're about that collectively. And I don't think it comes down to any one or two guys. That's something that is about our group.
What is one thing that's maybe going to stick with you throughout the offseason that this team didn't do as well that you would like to see them do better?
Yeah.
Probably more than one, but what's...
I'm the kind of the sweeping, what did you learn, singular questions are hard for me because it's a lot more complex than that. And I appreciate the question too. If I get to a point when I can boil my life down into one thing that I can do better, I'll do it. There's so many little things, I think, and that would be the theme, I guess, that there is no one thing, that it's usually a collection of things And those things at different points in the year, different things present themselves. And that's the challenge of the off season, is really to look back and reflect and analyze and see what those things are and prioritize them and try to figure out how to make them better.
And what's the challenge for you and the players to fix one thing, move to the next thing, and then know this is sorted out, we won't have to go back to this, and we can keep improving?
Well, anybody that's tried to improve in anything, I think you understand that there's progress, you know, and then there's slippage, and there's more progress, and there's so many variables that go into that. Sometimes what appears to be a step back, there may be a very, very clear reason for it that you have no control over. So I guess I think the primary thing is to look at the things that you have control over and what aspects of it you have control over, and the ones that you don't, or the areas that you don't, you can focus on and try to move the needle.
Last year you mentioned about people getting away.
Mm-hmm.
What is getting away from you? Are you going to watch the playoffs?
It's finishing this right here.
What does that look like?
You know, I when I get away, part of getting away is knowing that I'm away and not thinking about everybody wondering what I'm doing when I'm away. So I absolutely appreciate that we're getting to know each other. You're not going to find out my favorite book, nor my favorite food. You know, for me, one thing that's tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but always laced with some truth. You know, I really, with my family, travel's been an important part of our lives, and you know, that to me is the best way, you know, to get some space and to, you know, take your mind off certain things. And it's not easy, right? You gravitate back to certain things. So sometimes it's, you know, traveling to somewhere in Atlanta. Travel means a lot of different things. So looking forward to that.
How will you navigate kind of this offseason? There's always talk about changes with players and rosters.
Mhm.
How do you kind of navigate that as a coach? And would you like to see this same roster back next year, or do you think there are some slight adjustments?
Well, this is, as I said, you know, I'm just really appreciative of this group and what they put in, and you know, the growth that did occur. You know, and when you look at that, you know, you're always trying to get better. You know, you're always trying to improve. Whatever, you know, small changes can occur, larger changes. Some of that stuff, you know, is not things for me right now to try to focus on and figure out. When we come back, we'll look more and more and try to figure out how to get better. Really, and you know, it's that simple.
How much involvement do you like to have with like the draft process, free agency, things like that? Or are you kind of more of a, once the team is put together, then you know, then I kind of step in and deal with those things?
Well, I think those two questions are similar in some ways, and I think, you know, as I said, you know, having an opportunity to work with Landry and Kyle, and you know, the processes that they have and that we have, I think are really important. And I also think it's important to be very methodical as you approach those things, and to the extent that, you know, I can contribute in any way, you know, I'll do that.
There was a challenging stretch in the middle of the season.
Which one?
Okay, but I think at the time you said, you know, it's tough because we're a small team. In your collaboration with Kyle and Landry, is that something that you want to have addressed?
There's so many contingencies associated with that. You know, I mean, we were small the other night, but Jaylen was hurt, and so is Onyeka, and so is Sadiq. So, again, I think that the main thing is you want to get better. And whatever that looks like, as I mentioned, I think, you know, we're going to be really methodical about that process, and, you know, approach it from that vantage point.
How would you evaluate Jaylen's season and the strides he?
You don't want one thing? I can give you a lot on Jaylen. I think he had a terrific year, you know, and he was a guy that, you know, dealt with some things that I don't think he could control, you know, as far as, you know, a couple of those ankle injuries, you know, especially I'm picturing the one where he got upended up at Washington, which was when he broke his wrist. And then obviously, but, one of the things he did last year is he really worked, and he worked on certain things that were areas where he wanted to get better. And I anticipate him doing that again this summer, and it kind of goes to that same theme about just perpetual growth. As Jaylen moves forward in his career, I think he's someone, because of his mindset, that we'll see continue to improve. Last year there was focus on his skill work, his ball handling, his passing, his shooting, and there was also focus on his health, his body, and the health performance side. And I think we saw strides with both of those. Even when he did sprain his ankle, how he handled the treatment and how he got himself back, and obviously the biggest thing I think for him, and it's nuanced, is because of his feel for the game. He has so many different situations where he has to read what the best option is, and you're not always going to have a clear, this is the best option. There's a continuum there, and this is a high percentage shot, this is a higher percentage shot. There are so many things that go into it. This is a good pass, this is a better pass. And when you have someone that's able to make plays like that, there's a layer of the game that unfolds that you have to prepare yourself mentally and physically to be able to make all those decisions in a really efficient way. And I think he'll continue to get more and more efficient and play better and better defense. Did he say that? Did he say defense? There's your one thing.
Coach, I was curious, when you say building out a championship caliber team the right way, I know that's mostly Landry and Kyle in the front office's job, but from a coaching perspective, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's things that I think I've emphasized since I got here. I want to see us play really unselfishly. I want to see a group that is connected, and you see that on the floor. I want to see a group that competes, through everything, and the resilience that you have to do all those things. There's a component of just perseverance that's required, in this business, that's important to when things aren't going your way, because that as sure as we know, that's the one thing we can count on. So that you have to be able to persevere and really continue to commit to those other things, being unselfish and competing and being a connected group.
How do you teach that? Bogey mentioned it, Clint mentioned it, that kind of the toughness was lacking, the resilience. How do you kind of teach that and develop that over the course of the year?
Well, I think we were a really resilient team, to be honest with you. And how you define toughness is a lot of ways, to do that. To the extent that you do something over and over again, it becomes more and more a part of just what you are and, who you are and what you do. And, I think all of us need to bring that ourselves, and then collectively, that's the connectivity that I'm talking about, that, you raise your level, as a group, because you're competing for one another. There's times when you might, want to stop when you're on that third lap of the mile, whatever it is. But oftentimes, if you're, playing for something bigger than you, for a group, that you do find more of those things that we're talking about. These are subtle things, All right, you guys good? Okay, appreciate it. Yeah, you too. All right, exactly.